Welcome to Radio Amenti, embracing the eternal now, where minds and timelines merge, inspiring synchronicity, awakening potential, and making sense of change.
Hey everybody, I hope you're having a great week so far. Today is Thursday, October 3rd, 2024, and I cannot believe that we're in October. I know I said this on the last opening monologue of Radio Amenti, talking about the snap in the seasons and how it's strange to be living in Mexico where it's hot every day. And the only kind of indicator of fall is that now they serve pumpkin spice at Starbucks, and there's jack-o'-lanterns here. But yeah, it's really surreal that it's now October, and today happens to be the day that 5 years ago I actually launched Radio Amenti. 5 years ago is when I debuted episode 0, The Why Inside, which I haven't listened to again in a long time. And maybe worth revisiting. I don't know. I spoke about this recently in a podcast with Yoshino and aSan, which we'll be releasing here as a swapcast next week, about how, as a creative person, sometimes a creation just needs to be exercised, whether it's a doodle, a painting, a piece of writing, a recording. It just is something that needs to be expressed. And once it's expressed, I don't look back on it, especially with art. Actually, I keep a lot of my own drawings hidden in the closet, in a drawer. Once I'm done expressing it, it's not like I put it on display. And it's just a weird thing, and maybe it's my own artistic insecurity. But it's very similar with podcasts too. I record an episode, I listen while I edit, and then I don't revisit, like, ever. Unless it's like a specific thing. I don't know, maybe it's like weird. Can you relate? Does this happen to you? Whether you're a podcaster, artist, creative, writer, sometimes looking back on things is a great token of time, but other times it's like, it almost makes me uncomfortable. And I also think it might also play into a feeling of artistic insecurity. So like revisiting these things heightens feelings of like insecurity. It's better to just like get it out and over with and hope that the right person listens or sees or whatever. It's an interesting feeling. And it actually is a perfect segue into the conversation that I'm about to share today, because this interview with Rose Ides I did with Yoshino, another one of our co-hosted episodes through Artist Decoded that I'm releasing as a swapcast on Radio Amenti. Rose Ides is an incredible artist in mind that I first connected with through the magic of social media. Rose's art is very dreamy, and as Natalie Miller, my partner in Amenti, and our new forthcoming deck, Be Not Afraid, like to say, it's very much of the realm. And if you know what the realm is, it's that ineffable space of dreaminess and potential and fantastical visions and just nice feelings, right? So I first saw Rose's art and was like, oh, wow, yes, please, more. And then it just so happens we actually are published with the same publisher, Running Press, who put out her deck called The Oracle of Pluto, which Rose did the art for in tandem with the writing of Aubrey Hudeshell, who is an astrologer, esoteric explorer, really lovely mind. Oracle of Pluto is gorgeous, and they actually together just released a new book called The Cosmic Symposium, which is an astrological journey through the orchestra of the planets. Cosmic Symposium actually just came out, and a short description is that this book explores the role of the heavenly bodies, sun, moon, and planets, in the cosmic symphony of astrology, including their archetypes, history, associations, and roles in natal charts. I'm very excited about this book. I pre-ordered my copy, so in a few weeks when I'm in LA, I cannot wait to go to my mailbox and open it up. Both the Oracle of Pluto and the Cosmic Symposium are now available in most major retailers. It's good to support small businesses. So if you are going to order, I'd love to direct you to order directly from Running Press's website, which will be linked in the show notes. So anyway, back to what I was saying about artistic insecurity, this conversation with Rose, finding her art. This conversation that we had, Rose actually speaks to this very feeling of artistic insecurity, the idea of being able to claim the role of an artist and kind of getting past that. We go on this really beautiful tangential journey that is dreamy and wonderful and covers a lot of topics, but just helps kind of dispel the idea that you have to be a certain thing to be an artist or embody a certain, quality to be able to claim it. Rose has a really great way of explaining things, and actually, candidly speaking, Rose and I had dinner in Mexico City. Geez, I can't believe it was like a year ago. And she, for the first time in my life, she was the first person to ever really explain to me in a way that made sense about like neurodivergence and how it can manifest. And I've struggled with the what's wrong with me question my entire life. I never really believed I had like ADD or ADHD because I'm not a hyper person. But the way Rose was able to explain to me what these things mean and how they present themselves, and just kind of dispelling the idea that like ADHD is just about like being like super hyper helps me kind of like recontextualize in the way that my brain works. And yeah, I mean, it's helpful to know your operating system, and that my brain is actually operates a certain way, and there's not something wrong with me. It's just my programming. So that's getting away from the initial point. Needless to say, I definitely appreciate therapy and know that I absolutely have ADHD, and I'm trying to understand it better as I get older. And I wish that I would have understood that better as a young person. But I'm very grateful to Rose for helping me wrap my head around it more, because no therapist was able to so succinctly explain it the way she did. All that to say, so let's talk a little bit more about Rose, not about me. Rose is an artist from San Diego who specializes in veristic surrealism. She's a writer who explores the sociology of the arts in the United States. With a background in sociology, education, public health, and art, Rose's work aims to participate in the creative liberation and artistic compassion. She has published 2 illustrative projects with Running Press, the Oracle of Pluto deck, and the illustrated astrological compendium, The Cosmic Symposium, which you can pick up at all major book retailers. You can connect with Rose on Instagram at Ides of Rose. You can also learn more about Rose's work by going to roseides.com. Rose like the flower, Ides like the Ides of March, IDES. Rose also has a Substack, which you could find at roseides.substack.com. Meanwhile, if you enjoyed this show, please rate, review, subscribe. Every little rating helps move the needle. Sorry to say at the beginning of all these, but since we relaunched, and 5 years since the initial launch, let's keep rising. Anyway, I highly suggest following Rose on Instagram. I hope you enjoyed the show, and stay tuned for more episodes to come.
Well, hey, Rose, thanks so much for doing this. We really appreciate you for coming on to Artist Decoded and taking the time to do this.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for inviting me on. I can't really think of any better way to spend my afternoon other than talking about what I love with like-minded people. So let's do this.
Here we are. Here we are. Yeah, I'm excited as well. So I guess my first question is just why art, and how did you get into art, and how did you know that it was something that you wanted to dedicate your time to?
Yeah. Whew, that's a lifelong question. um, I think all of us, and I know this from personal experience, but also because I taught preschool for a few years as well. We're kind of born with this, this impulse to express ourselves, to use the colors and textures and whatnot around us to do that as well, not just our voices, but the actual material reality we're a part of. And so I started exploring that when I was younger, and I was supported in doing that. And I think, life can be challenging immediately, right? We're born, from this womb crying, and we're we right away have a response to the sensory environment, and we all choose different ways to cope with that. And my personal choice was, to grab markers and paints and express myself with those particular materials. And I suppose people started calling me an artist because of that, due to cultural definitions of what an artist is. And I started calling myself an artist. And what I mean by that is just that I participate in expressing myself creatively in a way that other people can observe. And I just stuck with that. That was my little way of kind of navigating and communicating this world. And, even as I got older and I worked other jobs like education, and I got into public health as well, I still had art on the side. And it was actually a few years ago, I had a pretty life-changing event, and I decided, I'm just going to do art full time, and I'm going to try to make a living that way. And that's where I've been since 2020.
Wow, impressive, impressive. Do you mind if I ask, what did you observe when working with children that, I want to say, like, gave you the confidence to pursue your own art, but also that informed the way that you perceive the role of the artist in the world?
Mm-hmm. It was difficult when I first started teaching preschool, and I saw how early this sense of artistic insecurity or intimidation kind of gets instilled in us. I think a lot of us have experienced this sense of artistic insecurity, and we tend to internalize it as our individual, response, or our individual shortcoming. And I know I did that for some time. And when I started teaching preschool, all the dots started coming together, and I realized that this artistic insecurity that I've experienced, and that so many people have actually confided their insecurity with me as well, I realized that it was culturally fabricated and not so much an innate experience. And that, that was troubling to see. It was troubling to see that it happened so early. We absorb these cultural standards very early on in our life. And, I'm not sure if it really radically transformed my own practice, but it certainly transformed the way that I saw art in the context of our collective and our socioeconomic structures around us. I changed my curriculum for the students, and I also started changing the way I spoke to others about artistic insecurity and about art, and started really dismantling some preconceived notions I had about what art meant, and even questioned the definition of art and how we interact with that word and the semantic cultural history behind the word art and how it actually defines our self-expression and the permission we give ourselves to be self-expressive. But that's just a little ramble about that. And
I think it's an important ramble, though, because what you're touching on is something that I haven't really heard in a lot of other conversation. A good friend of mine, Richie, he introduced me to this book. It's called The Power of Your Other Hand. And it's about exploring this dialogue between your dominant hand and your non-dominant hand, which actually represents your repressed childhood self. And a lot of that child self, these notions of who we are, who we can be, that limitless expanse of imagination, it begins to calcify, I think, the moment where we're told we can't, or we should, or this is who we should be, and all these limiting words that then take this innate sense of wanting to express ourselves and find our way in the world, and essentially just it begins to crumble and degrade. If that's not nurtured, it just begins to die. And I always use this analogy, I beat it to death actually, is the nothing from the never ending story, right? And I always think of that as we're born with all the limitless expanse of fantasia, and then when the nothing starts to creep in, it just ruins it all. So, your observations of how we come into this world screaming and then innately want to express ourselves, and then just through firsthand witnessing, I think it's really interesting, because I think there is a part of ourselves that is an artist in all of us. It's different mediums of expression, right? But we forget when that ends, because if it's when we're a child and we're kind of programmed a certain way, that core memory begins to dissolve, right? Is that the thread?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we start getting into these kind of arbitrary boundaries with the definitions of words. I mean, we even hear it when using the word definition. We're trying to define something, and we have this boundless, experience of the world. The universe doesn't really have these boundaries, and then our minds and our self-expression kind of funnel this phenomenon into whatever is coming out of us, this expression, I guess. And I think that particularly in places that have the legacy of European artistic standards and histories, we often ask ourselves, what is art? We want to define art and artists so badly, I think, as a way of maybe avoiding or trying to protect art from a sort of nihilism. I think if we stop asking what is art, or stop trying to define art, maybe that we're afraid that art will disappear. But I think it's quite the opposite. I think when we remove these boundaries and maybe do away with these words altogether, we just recognize that we're free to express ourselves in any way without judgment. I think that there's a lot of intimidation with the word artist and the identity of who deserves to call themselves an artist, and whether something someone makes is art or not. And I'd actually like to go into the history of the word art really quickly.
Of course.
Yeah. So in the 13th century, the word art is from Old French, and it means the skill as a result of practice. And this is obviously in the European context. And in the 14th century, out of Middle English, we have art, which is human workmanship, as opposed to any sort of workmanship or something beautiful that comes from anyone else besides humans. Then we move into the 16th century, where skill is measured specifically by representational forms of art. So we start moving away from recognizing the skill of European medieval abstraction and go right into representational forms as like the pinnacle of who is skilled and who is not skilled. And these representational forms are like depicting biblical scenes. And also this is when signing your name on your art actually becomes common practice. So it's the 16th century we really see collective visual culture begin to split into individual occupation. And the term like art and artist starts to move towards the individual and away from just like collective expressive culture and craftsmanship. This is actually the hub of this is happening in Europe, this like individualism. And so as this individualism, which is happening across the culture, it's not just in craftsmanship and expressive culture, it's exploding across Europe during this time, especially in the 17th century. And obviously creative culture became inevitably like intertwined with all of that, with that conceptual framework. And then in the late 17th century and throughout the 18th century, we see like the establishment of Western European academic art culture with the opening of the Royal Academy of Paint and Sculpture in Paris. And this academy basically becomes like the hub of what art is supposed to be and what art isn't, which like follows European imperialism and colonialism like across the world. Everyone across the world is exposed to it either through like consensual trade or like cultural violence at this time. This like standard and this like new question of what is art and what isn't art, and like the individual like master basically like supplants collective visual and other expressive cultures throughout the world. And it doesn't obviously replace them entirely because they still exist, but it enters the psyche. And the question is like there from this point forward. So I think today, especially in like the US, who is still under the legacy of British naval imperialism and colonialism, this question is like really prominent in our culture, and it's implanted in the youth at a really young age. And they decide like right away, like I'm either an artist or I'm not an artist, or I'm going to be an artist if I like earn that identity and people provide that for me. And I think that's just how we got to this point of like really pervasive artistic insecurity and like intimidation. And a lot of people are actually like afraid to even have an artistic practice at all because the really challenging emotions that come up with that.
Rose, do you mind if I ask, so given this extensive amount of and depth in which you've been studying the history of art and its ramifications on art culture as a whole, what does art mean to you?
What art means to me is it's the exact same thing as just being a human being, possibly being alive at all. But, you know, speaking from the experience of a human being, it just means being a human being. I think that we are artists. And I think that at one point, that word fractured ourselves into being something and to not being something. And I think that it's sort of an illusion. I think it's even without a creative practice, I think that we find little moments in our day-to-day life to express ourselves, to take an extra moment to make something just right in our eyes or beautiful or whatever. We can't avoid it. And I think when we like fully accept that, then we can maybe like dismantle these like dams that we've built in ourselves and just express ourselves fully, be fully human, which to me just means acting as a sort of funnel or channel for the material simulated reality around us. And I think the term art and artist is one of our most, I don't want to say harmful, but I believe it is quite a harmful illusion. And, that's what that means to me. I think art is the illusion, the fracturing of just expressing ourselves fully. It just means being human.
Yeah, I guess, I'm curious of that because, just when I was listening to you speak right now, I think it behooves us in terms of trying to seek some sort of enlightenment with our lives to be able to break out of these boxes or these illusions or these things that we hold onto as ways in which we identify ourselves that can actually limit us from achieving what we're actually supposed to be or what we're actually supposed to be doing with our life, or even allowing the movement of our experiences to inform us as to like how to approach the most authentic being of oneself. I just remember like when I was really young and starting art as a career, for instance, I remember I was like, man, I don't think my life is like, I think my life needs to be a little bit more fucked up because, like artists have fucked up lives, mm-hmm. I was just trying to basically fit in this box of like something that didn't really quite exist for me, and mm-hmm. I think I had this certain expectation of what, I guess it's just interesting how we perceive certain subcultures, like, and you want to be counterculture, but by being counterculture, you're actually existing in this culture. So for instance, like someone that's really into punk rock, right? It's like, yeah, I'm so like, subversive and whatever, but it's like, no, actually you're just kind of like everyone else that's into punk rock, Mm-hmm. So it's like, then I guess the question of understanding what your authentic self is, it's like, what are all of those layers that make you you? It might be an amalgamation of all these various things, and maybe not even might be, it is an amalgamation of all these various things. And kind of like what we were talking about before on the phone, this idea of imposter syndrome comes up, but then the question that I ask myself is like, how can you be an imposter to yourself? That's like mm-hmm. literally impossible, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think that also just piggybacking off of all that is like, we're talking about the differences of to be and then being, right? Like I remember as a thought exercise hearing about this idea of like E prime, which is like, it's limiting all forms of to be, and just to try going through life without explicitly identifying something. Like we say, that person is, or this is that, or this is a limited thing. But we all are so fluid and malleable, where it's like, we're actually not even, one thing. We're in the process of being. We're in a constant process of transformation. We're in a constant process. So for me, like, I really like the idea of like, it is the being. It is the being that's filtering through you. It's not limited to like, this is the static thing of what I am. You can be something in a certain moment, but the reality is like, it's a constant form of being. And just our language is almost a trap in and of itself, because we want to just limit it as like the period on the end of a sentence of like, yes, this is that, and this is this. And then again, it just puts our mind in this state of confusion of like, well, how can I be this and that? Well, you're kind of like constantly moving through these processes. Does that make sense? Because like, I just think that's something that it's even like hard to tangle with, that like mm-hmm. to eliminate the idea to be and to be being and moving and fluid, that's also like a form of liberation in and of itself.
That totally makes sense. I think about like the title of artist, right? The title identity of artist. To be an artist, it's the first step to pushing our attention onto the product of our expression instead of like, who is it that is expressing themselves? What is coming through them? What's being communicated? How is that? What relationship is happening between that and us? How is it inspiring us? But to the title of an artist, the identity of an artist, to be an artist, pivots us from that being over into looking at, okay, well, what did this artist make? Is it art? Is it not art? Whatever they came out of their expression, do they deserve to be called an artist for what they made? It really does move, these titles do move us in from being to be. And I think back to what Yoshino said about, oh, is my life, fucked up enough to be an artist? Like good artists have like fucked up lives, Yeah. A lot of people, that's like a common thing we think about, and we do. It's a great insight into, at least, U.S. culture. I can't speak for everybody else, but like the U.S. and the West, we do associate those two things, and it has to do with the repression of collective expressive culture, because when our lives are good and we're not forced to butt up or resist the repression, it's going to be people who are in a position, who our lives are fucked up or they're struggling in some way, who have to express themselves, are going to push through that boundary to become artists. And what you're seeing is not so much the true artist. What you're seeing is someone's struggle with their circumstances. And it's like, oh, this person struggled enough to earn themselves the art identity because, but when really they were kind of like either privileged enough to just kind of like pick up the paintbrush and be not have to like be faced with any cultural oppression at all, or they had to like push through that and become kind of this like subversive or alternative like economic entity. And whereas if we had really truly liberated collective expressive culture or craftsmanship culture, which humans historically have had, we don't really have these, hero artists, master artists, individual like artists that are admired by the masses, because we're all engaging in creating the culture together, creating cultural objects to leave to our descendants. We're all doing it together. So this like association of an artist and their struggles was not really a thing until this, frankly, European legacy that came out of the Renaissance.
Yeah, and I think us as observers tend to fetishize other people's lives, but not really understand the intricacies of what those people go through, or just speaking about that archetype of the starving, troubled, depressed artists that people put on some sort of strange fetishized pedestal. Mm-hmm. I think, I don't know about you all, but when I'm incredibly depressed, I can't create anything. So it's like, it's counter to that, but I think the knowledge and the wisdom that comes from having struggles in our lives is to be able to work through those honestly and to be able to come to some sort of conclusion and catharsis from those experiences in order to have those experiences guide us into the person that we need to be, or to understand more about ourselves and and hopefully in turn understand more about human nature in general. So I think it's very dangerous to fetishize people's lives when you don't live them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there's a weird balance though, like, right, it's really hard when I'm feeling depressed to create, but actually some of the best creativity I've had has come from moments in my life because of severe heartbreak, because of deep pain, because of death, because of loss. So it's like something that, Natalie Miller, who illustrated Amenti Oracle, she and I talk about a lot, because it's like, I hate the struggling artist, the suffering artist, like that whole cliche, because I think that's tied to back like becoming an economic entity. But there's something also about the invisible current of creativity and like the weird muse and how it can present itself as this way to transmute pain. And it's like, is that also part of the process of just because, being a sensitive or tuned in being, filtering through our pain, that's just kind of like the rub of it too. That is kind of like, when you're too happy, I don't feel that inspired. When I'm depressed, it's really hard, but somehow right in the midst of the most painful shit, that's when a lot of goodness comes out. So it's like this weird entity of energy that you have to surf through in this creative process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, to go back to like what I was saying about when we're born, we come out of that womb crying, we hit the sensorial world, and we start funneling it through self-expression, right? And so yeah, when we go through these like deep periods of grief or depression, or when we're faced with the sensory world, I think it does create moments where these things are being cooked, alchemized, and whatever this mysterious phenomena is, it comes through the threshold, which is us. And I was thinking about like what you said about how happiness was not that inspirational for the arts or whatever. And I don't know. I suppose I have to sit with that, because there is like something coming through when you're in a moment of like ecstasy or deep peace, and it's not seemingly dense enough to be created into something observable, but but we're still acting as like a threshold, right? We're still whatever it is coming through that threshold is just coming through at like a different density.
Yes. And I love that word threshold, because it does feel like that, the intermediary between realms. Mm-hmm. And again, to tie it back to your art. So, we've talked a lot about what art means to you, how you've become an artist, how art, like just as an observer, I like to comment on how your art actually speaks to something on the soul level. I remember, gosh, I don't know how I first saw your art. It was maybe because of the funnel of social media. And I think there's something to be said about like just how these visions do speak to something that transcends language and is on a cellular level, like the way that you can, that's a metaphor I always use. It's like, I love connecting with artists and creatives that are able to take a screenshot of the dream world, because that's so hard to articulate. It's hard to put a word around or to say, but then when you see it, you're like, that's it. That's the realm. But when these visions come to you, they are, the way they appear is so dreamy and intuitive and just that ineffable. If you don't mind, like, I'd love to just kind of hear more about your process with kind of transmuting these visions from that liminal space.
Yeah. So, speaking of the dream world, that's where I am most of the time. I have an active dream practice. I've had it my entire life. It started when I was really young, and I had very vivid dreams that were quite mysterious. And I know this is not unique to me, so I'll obviously get to from here to actually drawing them. But yeah, it started with vivid, mysterious dreams when I was younger, and they were vibrant. They were communicative. I had many like dream mentors that would show up in my life, very otherworldly, and but they weren't just visual. I was having emotions in these dreams that I just didn't have I wasn't experiencing in my waking, let's say sunlight life. I was experiencing like deep, profound peace, like, really heightened sense of joy, and my emotions were almost exaggerated in these like lucid dreams, and that I was really drawn to that. There was a place to be separated from, the chronic ailments of my body. I grew up with a migraine disorder that hit me regularly, kept me out of school quite a bit, and this was a place to just like be away from these ailments, and also like the distractions of school. This was when I was a child, and I was experiencing all sorts of educational trauma from my neurodivergence, and it was a hard place for me to be, and like adults didn't know how to interact with me. They weren't trained on that, and a lot of them hadn't had the same experiences or explored those experiences, so they didn't know how to interact with me from a place of compassion. And so I think that's where like my dreaming like really was an escape from all of that. And actually I think escape is the wrong word, because it was a place to really like be myself, and without these sort of arbitrary fabricated structures of the community I was in. And I am so thankful that I had, family members that they would buy me art supplies. We had like a dollar store next to us, and we could get markers for like 50 cents, like a little pack of markers, stuff like that. And the connection was made between this dream world and it didn't exist, and visually it didn't exist in my waking life. So I put it on the blank square that I was given, which was, a canvas, a wall, a piece of paper. So that's how it started. But I kept going with this like dream practice. I started reading about lucid dreaming. I started doing those exercises, and I just like really committed to exploring these parts of me. And as I became a teenager and going through some of the like teenage angst and normal developmental like period where you're kind of exploring some more challenging like emotions and gaining like a sense of awareness over like kind of darker stuff, I explicitly sought guidance through my dreams. I would ask, whatever is out there, whatever mirror or spirit or whatever, to like help me with myself. And my dreams responded to that and started becoming quite profound in like the visions I was having, and kind of giving me these narratives of what is outside of human life, or what is after death, or before birth, or things like that. And when I was 14, I was in a really dark emotional period of my life, and that's when I like really asked, I don't know if I could like, I don't know if this is all that there is. Like, can you show me something after death? This like mysterious psyche, whatever it is, whether it's collective or individual or something beyond how we can describe it. I fell into this, state in between wake and sleep, and I felt my body, like everything went black, and I felt my body kind of being lifted up. And then everything just turned into pink light, and I couldn't feel anything anymore, even like my eyelids, like nothing was there anymore. Everything was just pink light. And I felt this immense peace and no sense of time. And I just felt to myself like I could stay here forever. And it was just this incredible feeling. And this was 20 years ago, and I can still feel it, like, by demand or by choice. I can just sit there and like feel this feeling. And whenever I make my art now, I meditate on that feeling and I go back to that, and I try to funnel that through my threshold into art. This like mystery, and this like basically this base material of the universe, at least in my narrative, that is just peace. It's just peace. It's what all of the light does, like dissolves into. It's where everything goes. And, 20 years later, I'm just trying to like push that feeling out into my art. And I do use like symbols for that, like scenery, landscapes, people, animals, various colors. But whenever I'm creating these scenes, I'm always like checking back in with myself. Like, does this remind me of this place I went to? And is it communicating that to like other people, that like there's something underneath it all that is just completely exquisite?
It absolutely is. As you describe it, that is, I think, the perfect articulation of how it feels as a viewer, that transmission, that empowerment, that encounter. That is absolutely the feeling that I receive when I see your art. And it's funny because I've actually never read Philip K. Dick's The Valis series, but I remember hearing that, in the book, actually, they talk about this pink beam of light that exposes the hidden facts of reality in the universe. So maybe that is part of the psyche somewhere.
Yeah. I've spoken to someone else before who had the same experience with the same color. And I'm forgetting off the top of my head right now, because that's not really how my mind works. But I have read in many instances of this pink light. And, I don't really I think individuality should be respected, but I do think it's an illusion. And so when I have this experience of this pink experience, let's call it that, I do think that it's entirely shared. Like, we're all kind of experiencing the same things in different ways. And maybe that's like one of my drivers for trying to communicate that to others. Maybe I'm like looking for that connection. Like, hey, has anyone else? Are you like feeling this too? You're feeling this too, right?
Definitely. It does feel like a beacon. I think it's really interesting, right? Like where you had mentioned not to discount our individuality, but we are kind of part of the bigger tapestry. And I also think, tying back to education and like the educational trauma that many of us receive, because the traditional educational programming has been to create like worker bees instead of really nurture the creative impact that we all can have as we are individuals also creating together. So I think that's like an interesting segue about maybe the path that you're taking even now is like your own education and how you're going to be starting the PhD program and maybe a little bit more of that. Cause I do think it's really interesting looking even how like going back to like the indigenous ways of storytelling and education and just a deeper understanding of what that can mean as a form of learning and expression, maybe a good segue.
Gosh, You know, education has been a major theme in my life in so many ways. You know, like going back to, my educational trauma, I did not fit in various ways. I was neurodivergent in various ways that made my experience of education, it was basically just constant punishment. Most of my memories of elementary school are me sitting alone in the hallway. And on top of that, half the time I was out of school for a migraine disorder. And so I could never catch up on my work or anything. And um, that led to a long time struggle of getting through college. And I always enjoyed learning. So it was always personally heartbreaking for me that I was having so much trouble with the educational system, because I wanted to be there and I wanted to open a book and have a mentor and whatnot. And I think that's what led me to be an educator and a mentor for children. I just, people had always said, "Oh, you're such a good teacher. You're such a natural at this." Well, it was really because I knew how to connect with the students in my classes who other teachers may consider disruptive or whatever. And I knew what they were going through. I knew how to speak to those students. I knew what they needed. And I also, because I enjoyed creating like visual culture, I incorporated that into my curriculum, and which led me, I think I previously stated this, which led me to ultimately like making these insights into artistic insecurity and like its cultural history and everything. But so after years of being in college, I studied sociology. I went to UCSD for global health. I studied art history. I did all these different pathways until it really ultimately all dovetailed. My work history and my personal history and my education dovetailed into this sociology of the arts pathway and its intersections with imperialism, colonialism, and public health. And so I'm pursuing a graduate school, specifically a PhD in Indigenous rights and public health with the University of North Dakota, which teaches its curriculum through a two-eyed curriculum with some of the nations around the world's leading Indigenous scholars, and their epistemological philosophies are deeply steeped in integrity and autonomy and making this world one that's in respectful dialogue with each other. So that's the path I chose, and I'm going to use like the tools that I'm taught to really like dismantle these arbitrary artistic hierarchies, because I truly believe that understanding that and dismantling those is going to be the key to really getting back in touch with our humanity, and like making programs too that really prioritize self, creative expressive culture and craftsmanship as a social right, and empower people to recognize that we have the resources to socialize our expressive and craftsmanship cultures so that everyone can participate, and so that we can build these cultures together and amongst each other and with each other. And that's basically the direction I'm going, is collectivizing in a really empowered and abundant way our self-expression. And in order to do that, we have to interrogate these colonial legacies, these imperial legacies, and frankly, the Eurocentric cultural hegemonies that are still like living on the periphery, and we take them for granted. And like some of these like preconceived notions of art, for example, we think that they're innate and that they don't really come from anywhere when they're actually cultural. So I'm kind of like looking to shine a light on those like dusty parts of our minds where we really just like don't even know the histories of certain things that even define our lives. Well, I went off on a tangent there, but that's what I'm planning to do with my graduate education. Yeah.
I love it.
I like the tangent.
Me too.
Well, yeah, thanks so much for doing this and coming on. Like, is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience? Maybe some advice, or maybe, yeah, let's go with that. Maybe some advice.
So there's a few like commitments, I think, that we can all adopt. A few psychic commitments we can all adopt as a kind of like a short manifesto, or just a practice in kind of like reforming our thoughts. And I can go through those really quickly. So it starts with this. I encourage the freedom of all individuals in their artistic participation. I participate in artistic freedom through loving self-talk. I confess my subjective artistic preferences and reject objective artistic hierarchy. I am committed to building the conditions for voluntary artistic cooperation and participation of those in my community. I am committed to uplifting collective creative expressive culture. And I think most importantly of all, and like this is at the heart of artistic anarchy, is I liberate my own emotional body from my inner art critic. So I think taking all of those commitments and really thinking about what they mean to you and how you can not only apply those to yourself, but most importantly, we're relationship based. So how can you apply all of these into your relationships with others? How can you nurture creative liberation in the way that you think of others and treat others, and give them the safety to consider themselves artists.
I love that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. That's amazing.
Thanks for having me on here and letting me just kind of work through all of these thoughts with you all, because as you said, it's a lot to tangle with. It's a lot to unwrap. We have a lot of work ahead of us.
For sure. Just to wrap it up, for anybody that's listening, how can they, like, are there any projects that you'd like to just maybe share as a parting note, and how, people can stay in touch with your work?
Sure. Well, if you want to see like my public gallery online, you could just visit me at Instagram. My handle on there is Ides of Rose. And I have a book I illustrated that's coming out called The Cosmic Symposium. And you can get a sense of some of that artwork we were talking about earlier in there. And let's see, I'm currently writing a book on the topics of artistic insecurity and their socio-economic and cultural roots in the U.S. And that will be, well, I don't know when that will be coming out, but I'm working on it. And it will be an exploration that's meant to be empowering, especially for those who have yet to pick up a creative, expressive practice of their own. So more on that soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Rose.
Awesome. Yeah, sounds
Thank you,
good.
you
Thanks so
too.
much.
Thanks, of course. Pleasure speaking to you both as always.